Here we see the puppeteer hard at work. He will sit before that banana log for about 8 to 9 hours. This all-night performance. He will not get up. He will not speak or say anything that is not within the world of the performance. And he will focus on telling these very elaborate retellings of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. There are many other different kinds of stories that may appear in the Wayang theater, but for the Javanese shadow puppet theater, these are the most common ones that are told. Here we see him with the puppets placed in a banana log, which holds them in place, and they are placed against a shadow screen called the kalir. Behind the shadow screen is some of the audience, and then behind the puppeteer is another part of the audience. Directly behind the puppeteer is his assistant, who will hand him puppets during the show and bring him food if he needs it or drink. And then we have the gamelan, who he is conducting. If you notice, his left hand is reaching into the box, and there he's holding a wooden knocker. He is signaling the gamelan orchestra, and he's punctuating his dialogue with raps from the puppet chest. This other interesting parts of this, you see lots of puppets all around him. The puppet box has several leaves of puppets that are set up for several scenes. Also, to either side of the puppeteer, just behind the large leaf-shaped puppets, is a display of puppets called the simpingan. This is a very important part of the ceremonial display of Wayang. The simpingan is a kind of kaleidoscope of characters that you can find in the Wayang world. Nearest to the puppeteer, you see the most refined characters, and then moving outward to the outer edges, you see some of the more elaborate and kasar characters. What we know about Wayang today is that it's much the same for most of its history. Some of the earliest evidence we have of a Wayang performances in Java is that it was a solo performance, itinerant performer who traveled around performing where it was needed. And this is still the case today. A temporary stage, as you see here, is built in a house compound or a village square, and it's made to house an occasion like a wedding. It faces the house who is holding the celebration, and they've paid for everything to bring the puppeteer in, to feed all the guests, to feed all the musicians and the puppeteer. And these kinds of occasions are ways in which the host is really hoping to gain some sort of recognition, both socially and spiritually, for their trouble in making and putting on this occasion. You see today a daytime performance, which happens right before the all-night performance. And here the kids are lining up and watching the show, hanging on to the stage, which seems like it's already falling apart for this temporary occasion. People perform Wayang because they want to receive a blessing. The act of performing of Wayang is considered a kind of spiritual puja or offering. In this way, it is meant to smooth over the transition from one day to the next. The one day when someone is not married to the next when they are married. There's kind of a rite of passage. It's usually sometimes also to honor special occasions, like a good harvest in the village or a good year at a factory. There are all kinds of different occasions that people hold Wayang performance, but it's a celebration, and the performance is meant to sort of be as a blessing. Here is a 100-year-old illustration from a Dutch magazine, which sort of steps back and you can kind of see the arrangement. You can see there's an audience behind the puppeteer, some of them lounging around or sleeping. An all-night performance, you don't sit rapt, attentive to every moment. There are parts that people stir up and get excited about when the clowns come up, or there's an exciting fight scene, or a philosophical debate between the characters about what to do and how to do it. There are all kinds of different things that happen in a wayang performance, and it appeals to a wide range of different kinds of people for that reason. One of the important ways we look at the significance of a wayang performance is to recognize its ancient history. And there is a performance done in the wayang, which people generally regard as sort of the spiritual core of wayang. This is something that may have been a ritual that existed even prior to the arrival of Hinduism, that shadow puppets or some kind of performance was done as a way to exorcise a demon that was haunting the village or a people. And so this exorcism that is done in wayang is called the ruatan. And it has some Hindu elements in it, and it has some Islamic elements in it, as all wayang does. But it fundamentally deals with this idea of kind of contending with this evil force that is cursing the people in the region. And this character, which is identified today as Kala, who is a child of Shiva, it is a demon who is born out of Shiva's lust for a woman in meditation. And so this child grows up devouring and attacking people. The people cry out, they ask for help, and Shiva decides that he must give his child this power to eat other people. But it is Vishnu, the preserver, who realized Shiva has overstepped his power and he needs to restore the balance. So the Vishnu comes down to earth and in the guise of a puppeteer. And so in the story, you have a kind of meta story, which means this is a story about performing wayang. And in this performance, this puppeteer puts on a story about the birth of Kala, and then he sets the stage for the people to make this offering so that they can trick Kala into thinking he has been fed when he has not. And once he has been fed, he goes away and never curses these people again. There are many ways in which people can become cursed by Kala. There are all kinds of different inauspicious arrangements when a child is born or has a certain number of siblings, or certain kinds of things that might happen to you in life might make you what they call food for Kala. But the most common way in which people talk about being food for Kala is if you're an only child. This is a particularly inauspicious arrangement in Javanese households and in Balinese households. And so a person who is food for Kala may find it difficult to find someone who is willing to marry them. So as a child grows up and comes into marrying age, often a family will host this very expensive ritual to kind of tell the community that they have taken care of the curse and that this person of marriageable age is now free to marry. There are many unique aspects in a ruatan. You'll see it's performed during the daytime. There is a lamp, it's just outside the field of view, and it is not the typical today oil lamp. It is not the typical, electric lamp, but it is an oil lamp, one of the only times in which oil lamps are used in performances. And so the shadow screen has been pulled back, and we can directly see into the home of the people who are holding this performance. Directly opposite the dalang on the other side of the screen are the people who are cursed by Kala, for whom this performance is their benefit. The ruatan is performed only by special performers who are 7 generations of puppeteer and have the spiritual power and knowledge to perform this without mistake. It is very essential to the ritual of a ruatan that everything be done just so. Otherwise, the curse will not be lifted. Here is a picture of the demon Kala as he appears as this sort of terrifying Rakshasa giant with this voracious appetite. So, what do we know for a fact about the origins of Wayang? There is an inscription that was done on a metal plate around 940 CE that simply reads, Sigaligi performed Wayang. Sigaligi is a name of the performer that is very interesting. It's not the name of a royal personage, nor is the name of a commoner, but is a person who has a certain celebrity, Sigaligi, like someone who is well known. This also might indicate that this is a foreigner, but not necessarily. As they performed Wayang for a special occasion, we know that this is something that they came to this spot to honor this event. There are shadow puppets in India, and several people have argued that there are telling similarities between the shadow puppets of India and the shadow puppets of Java. That said, there are many indigenous qualities to the Javanese shadow puppets that do not appear in India at all. So it may have been that there was some kind of impetus from India to develop the shadow theater in the way they did. But really the technology and the orchestration and the way in which the performance is done is something very unique to Java and Bali. Over here on our right, you see a very important puppet, a very distinctive puppet called the Kayon, or Tree of Life, or Gunungan, which means mountain. This special stylized puppet is the image of a tree. And you see a temple in the center, and up in its branches, you see these Kala heads. On either side of the tree, you see a tiger and a bull. The winged characters, the Garudas, come and sort of define the bottom edge, and there, the lower edge guarding the temple are Rakshasas with clubs. The image of the Kayon is kind of the spirit, the life force that inhabits and animates the actions of the puppet theater. It is often used at the beginning as a stage curtain, sort of a placeholder, meaning the play is about to begin, and then it's swept off stage, and then it might be used as a prop. It could be a mountain or a large boulder that a Rakshasa throws, or it could be a cloud in the sky, or it could be a wave from the ocean. It's a general all-purpose sort of puppet that the Dalang uses according to the needs in their story. The front side of the Kayon is painted realistically in every detail, as you see now. But the back side is given a very interesting change. It's where everything is kind of consumed by this head of Kala, sort of flaming effigy of destruction and all-consuming power. This side of the puppet is revealed at the middle of the puppet performance, called the Goro Goro, the time of chaos. And this moment is when everything ordinary is upended and the clowns come forward and begin to set the world aright. Now, there are a lot of stories about how Wayang began. There are a lot of common beliefs that ordinary people in Java will tell you how they think Wayang began. They are often repeated in the performance itself, and Dalang are very familiar with these ideas, and they define a very important sense of how Wayang is thought of today. They may not be true, but they do represent a very common belief in the importance of Wayang. The legendary history says that Wayang originated as puppeteers copied the carvings on the temples. The temples came first, and then the puppets were sort of an outgrowth of temple traditions. That may be true, but we really have no evidence. Certainly by the time of the Mojapahit period, there was a cross-influence between the puppets and the temple carvings. During the Mojapahit period, also, the hero Panji is credited for the ceremonial Chris dagger and for bringing gamelan music and wayang together. Gamelan would have been a royal kind of instrumentation, much too sophisticated for and expensive for ordinary people to perform. But it may have been at this time that royal court patronage allowed for this blending of wayang traditions and the royal courts. Another very important influence came with the arrival of Islam in Java. It is said that the Muslim leader Wali Sunan Kalijogo, who lived sometime in the latter half of the 15th century, that he encouraged performing wayang inside the mosque as a way of bringing Javanese into and converting them to Islam. Now, of course, there are many Muslims who do not think this is a good idea, that theatrical performances should not be performed inside a mosque. And these WALI SONGO, these Muslim leaders, were 9 of them were very important sort of spiritual leaders who helped convert the island of Java to a kind of mystical Islam. Islam in Java always had at its core a kind of syncretic influence, a willingness to kind of blend with the past with the present in a way that they sort of brought forth a kind of interest in sort of finding commonalities in the Hindu traditions and drawing forth those into these new Islamic traditions. So this kind of sense of the way in which the WALI SONGO are an important Islamic identity at the core of how wayang is performed in Java today. Another very interesting part of the ancient history of wayang is this very rare tradition called Wayang BEBER. There are very few performances of Wayang BEBER today, and there have been very few for quite some time. But it's very likely that this was a kind of theater that came from India originally. This sort of picture recitation we know is a very ancient tradition in India. And it may have been this kind of picture storytelling that came to Java and introduced so many of the tales that are the basis of Wayang Kulit today. Wayang BEBER is a very interesting tradition where the puppeteer simply pulls out a long cloth painted with a scene from a story, and they unravel the scene and they tell the story. Behind them may be a few gamelan musicians, and they begin to sort of elaborate on the story to the audience attendant. You can see it has many sort of the basic elements of a wayang performance. But again, the stories would have been things of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Today, Wayang BEBER often tells stories of Javanese history. They're often referred to as the stories of Javanese history. In the 16th century, Wayang BEBER fell out of favor and was no longer able to perform for the Ruatan, this sort of central ritual performance that gives wayang its validity. was so important to defining the meaning and the power of how wayang is performed. It's interesting that the loss of the ability to perform ruatan through wayang beber created it into a kind of second-class wayang theater from which it seems never recovered. Its popularity today is certainly at a remove from all other forms of wayang. But it's important to note that it may have been, at one point, a very important influence on the development of wayang in Java. Here is a depiction of the Javanese Wayang beber, a battle scene. It's quite exciting in its stylized, painted form. You can see the extenuated bodies of the characters. It's quite different in style than the Balinese wayang paintings. You can see here an example of the wayang paintings in Bali, and compare that with our wayang paintings in Java. You can see the Javanese paintings are much less realistic, and the limbs are much longer and more stylized. The stylization of wayang makes it very hard to understand for many people. We talked about this before, that it was the Islamic influence, this prohibition against representing things as real, living things, that provided an opportunity for the Javanese to extenuate and stylize their figures so they were less naturalistic. But there is another element to this which I find really interesting. Part of this is sort of part of the legendary history, but it is widely believed among the devotees and people who are enthusiastic watchers of wayang that to watch a wayang performance is to meditate on the names of God or the names of Muhammad. You see here how Arabic calligraphy has been laid over top the wayang puppet on the left, suggesting that the stylization of the limbs and the body are made to look like the names of Muhammad and the names of God in Arabic calligraphy. Certainly there's a certain quality to the Javanese puppets which suggests this idea of calligraphy and long attenuated forms. There is no really agreed upon idea about how to read, per se, a wayang puppet. The suggestion of calligraphy is indeed a very abstract notion that does not seem to follow in any concrete or literal way. Nonetheless, it is a common belief, and one I think does lend itself to understanding why the stylization of the puppets look the way they do. You can see from the very intricate carving the way in which the batik patterns have been reproduced into the shapes and folds of the puppet. Here is a refined character in the Wayang Kulit. There's a very clear lack of ornamentation, very small eyes, nose, and mouth. The head is leaning forward and downcast in humility. These kinds of characters, such as this Arjuna character, is a character who is often found in meditation, often speaks with a low, gentle voice, is contemplative, and rarely gets angry. And so the epitome of control and halus refinement. Next, we have our semi-refined characters, sometimes referred as lenyap. They have, their head is up. They have more ornamentation on the arms and in their crown and on their bodies. They speak forthrightly. They are refined, but they tend to act in the world. They are more quick to anger, and they're more quick to take action. And so their bodies tend to be, even though they might be small, they can be quite powerful. This is a very popular character, Wisangani, who is the child of Arjuna. Then we have our rugged characters. These are bold and powerful characters. The ones here you see as Bhima with his fingernail claws and his powerful build. He's still very humble with his downcast head, but he also is quite mighty and powerful and is quick to anger and take offense. He speaks forthrightly, but he speaks directly to all occasions the same. Whether you are a god or whether you are a commoner, he will speak directly in the common middle tongue. Then we have our Clono-like characters, our emotional characters with bright red faces, fangs, flashy crowns, and lots of ornamentation. Their big bodies, they usually only have one moving arm in the foreground, and they are terror. They are quick to find fault and make trouble, and they are always looking for some advantage. In this case here, you see the head is slightly bowed, so this may be a more circumspect kind of Rakshasa, but you can tell by the claws and the fangs he's going to be emotionally uncontrolled. Then we have certain special characters, characters who are within the Wayang world, but do not follow any particular design but their own. There are the monkey characters, which can have certain qualities of being sort of semi-refined, but clearly have more monkey physical characteristics and movements. And then we have unique characters like Durna, who is the counselor and for the Kaurawa and the Pandava. Another important character type in the Javanese theater are the clown characters. We've talked about the Punakawan before. Here we have the main three characters, Sama, Gareng, Petrok. And the character Bawor is a specialty character. In many parts of Java, different kinds of puppets have special identities that attribute to their region, and they speak in their local dialects, and they are identified with the people in there. So Bawor is a very popular character in the region of Banyumas, and he is the one who commonly joins the clown characters in their actions. Samad, Gareng, and Petruk can be found in many parts of Java. If Samar is the father, Gareng and Petruk are two of his children, and Bawor would be another child of Samar as well. The clown characters, unlike in Bali, do not translate the dialogue. In Java, the heroes and heroic characters speak a language which, although stylized, is still more like modern Javanese. Hence, the clown characters no longer need to have that special function of translation. Still, the clown characters play a very important role in introducing the modern world. They often act and talk about things that are happening in the village in the time, and so they introduce new themes and ideas. They are innovators in the story tradition. They are the sort of wild card that brings out things, the unexpected things that make the stories meaningful and memorable. And this is a very important idea in Wayang. Probably one of the most central ideas, in my estimation, is that this tradition is not just about sort of re-performing the past, but it is about bringing into present these important historic characters. And by bringing them into the present, that means sort of changing and altering the story so that it's meaningful to the audience who is in attendance. There's a word. Other artists have completely broken the mold and taken up wild and innovative forms. Here is Harry Dono, who is a modern art painter, has taken on Wayang, is quite fanciful in his Wayang Legenda. In this, he's not only changed the puppets, he's changed the stories. He's not trying to retell traditional Javanese stories. He's bringing in stories from Sumatra and trying to create a storytelling tradition which is more playful and eccentric and outrageous, like his own quirky sense of humor. Wayang Legenda was actually quite a hit when it appeared in Java in the 1980s. It was a performance that had a great deal of fun and innovation, whereas Sukhasman's Wayang Ukur was considered a little bit disturbing to many traditional puppeteers and audiences because it seemed to take a tradition and move it outside what they were comfortable with the change. So the idea of Sangit, innovation, there are levels of Sangit which are acceptable, and there are levels of Sangit which people feel uncomfortable with when the puppeteer essentially fails to really bring something new that the audience will accept. Other kinds of innovations that have happened in Wayang recently are Christian Wayang. Here you see called Wayang Wahyu. Here you see Jesus Christ nailed to the cross, and you have these puppets which are, the refined characters in the way that they are designed with the sort of Islamic influences. But it also shows this really interesting sort of ornamental decorations. We find Christ seeking salvation. The gunungan or kayon is in the general shape of the Javanese kayon, but inside that, instead of Garudas, we find angels. Instead of kala heads, we find apostles and the figure of Christ. And at the very top, we see the hand of God. These kinds of innovations are popular in their respective audiences. I have never actually seen a performance myself. Dalang Sugino is a very popular dalang from the region of Banyumas, and he is typical of the sort of new generation puppeteers who grew up very comfortable with this new technology. You can see his stage set. He's got a whole range of different colored floodlights, black lights, strobe lights, and floodlights that provide from different angles. He's also been known to use smoke screens in his puppetry. When I met Dalang Sugino in 1990, he hadn't ever seen a pen pointer laser, the sort of common toy you can find anywhere now. Was quite an exotic thing even in the United States in the 1990s. I had brought him one to see what he would do with it. He was infatuated with his new pen pointer laser and immediately set to use it in his performances. Here is a clono character who is meditating and sending out this powerful weapon from his meditation, and the pen pointer laser is the sort of bright spot on the shadow screen. Notice how he has dimmed the scene and made it bluish in tint to accentuate the light of the laser. Many audiences found this very exciting, and Dalang Sugino enjoyed a continued popularity, not because of his laser pointer, but because he was just a really phenomenally funny and interesting puppeteer to watch. This just became one more little joke in his arsenal. Other dalang are wholly opposed to this kind of innovation. Dalang Sugito is a puppeteer, also in Banyumas, who comes from several generations puppeteer, who holds that there are certain things and traditions that he believes you should not cross in your innovations. He is a popular puppeteer, but by no means as popular as Dalang Sugino. So Sugito, he is part of that generation who hold fast to their traditions and are ones who are steadfast in maintaining what they believe are the essential values of the tradition. So when we talk about Javanese Wayang Kulit, most of the traditions I have mentioned to you, the things you see, fall within the blue circle here. Banyumas is further to the west of Kebumen. And the most popular areas for shadow puppetry is the areas of Yogyakarta and Surakarta. And of course, Bali has its own tradition there. Now I will talk about another tradition, which included in the red circle here, and this is the tradition of Wayang Golek, which can be very popular in Bandung and Cirebon, and in a small village of Kebumen, which is where I studied puppetry last. Wayang Golek are these wood-carved doll puppets. It is a much more recent tradition than Wayang Kulit, whereas Wayang Kulit may be 1,000 years old. Wayang Golek is maybe 200, 300 years at most. Here is the tradition as it appears in the mountainous region of Bandung. There they have plentiful, soft jungle woods that they use. So their puppets are quite large and quite dramatic. They love these sort of brilliant, stylized puppets, and they tell the stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Here we see Yudhishthira greeting Arjuna, who is bowed, and behind Arjuna on the right is Nakula and Sahadeva, and behind Yudhishthira on the left is the hero Bhima. So these are the Pandava brothers as they are known in the Wayang Golek. Toward the north coast in the city of Cirebon, it is a much drier area, and there they use a hardwood to carve their puppets. So the puppets are much smaller and more delicate looking. They're often referred to as Wayang Golek Chapak. Chapak means short hair or short cut. And you can see these much lower and simpler crowns. Wayang Chapak is a puppet theater which is strongly influenced by the masked dance tradition, which is also popular in this region. Notice the Klono dancer on the left and how similar the crown and the puppet, the Golek puppet on the right. These Wayang Chapak puppets have often the puppeteer who performs Wayang Golek will also have the skills and the ability to perform the masked theater. Another variety of Wayang Golek is the Wayang Golek Menak of Kebumen. Wayang Golek Menak comes from a kind of jungle region along the coast, and they use hardwood for the heads and a kind of soft wood for the bodies. The bodies are all covered in these kind of jackets, which is very common dress used in the Wayang Orang. And so this is the kind of clothing that people would wear when they perform. This is the hero of the Wayang Golek Menak. Menak stories are the stories of the uncle of Muhammad, and this is the uncle of Muhammad, Amir Hamza, who's often commonly referred to as Jayangrana, the most victorious. Jayangrana Amir Hamza is a refined hero, and he holds court and he draws people to him. He is not nobly born. He is not born into being a king, like all the kings of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. He is and has this title of Menak. He achieves his status through popular accolades. And so in this way, he is a very different kind of character. He appears just like a royal king, but in fact, he is a king by royal popularity, not by some sort of divine genealogy. Wayang Kulit Menak characters and stories have a wonderful influence in the region of Kebumen, and they have been a popular treat there. Kebumen is a small town in a rural area, and they don't have the high exalted histories and court genealogies and things like that. So this story of Menak, the story of a popular leader who rises up and brings his people of all different kinds to his cause, is a story of Islam. It's a story of the conversion of the world to Islam through this uncle of Muhammad. Now, of course, it's not actually Islam in the Menak stories that is people are converting to, because Muhammad hasn't been born yet. And so Amir Hamza is kind of paving the way for his more famous nephew. He is converting people to a kind of monotheism, which they call generically the religion of Abraham. And in this way, it is a kind of precursor to the struggles that Muhammad himself will have when he converts the world to Islam.